Hello students, this is Professor McDermott with your recap of the Module 4 discussions. I've noticed that our viewership is falling off lately for the recaps, so in a desperate attempt to get everyone to watch, we have a special guest star, my dog Daisy, right behind me here on the bed. Say hello, Daisy. Hello. She's a bit of a ham, like me. Anyway, I've already given you your announcements in the email earlier this module. So let's jump right into these discussions. There certainly is a lot to talk about this time. As we've moved into the age of enlightenment, this is a time when thinkers built on earlier medieval ideas while at the same time taking them in very new directions that would have major consequences for the modern world and really for all of our lives as citizens of the modern world. We'll start with group one and John Locke. John Locke, of course, one of the very greatest English political philosophers. An excerpt here from the Second Treatise of Government by John Locke. And this excerpt started off with Locke talking about the family, which seems perhaps like an odd way to introduce a discussion about political society, but for Locke, it's very, very significant. Some good posts on this. Brandy Jefferson, you had a very nice post here. You said, from my understanding, the point of Locke's discussion of family life in the first part of this document is describing how when we were all born, it is left up to the parents to teach us the ways of life. Hence, they are governing us. As we grow older, it is up to us as adults to follow what our parents taught us or make our own decisions as we go. Hence the consent of the people. So, in other words, Locke believes that all governments, in order to be legitimate, have to be based on the consent of the governed. And his point is that when we're children and we don't know any better, our parents can govern us like absolute rulers. But when we come of age, when we become adults, we come into our own inheritance. We're able to make decisions for ourselves, and therefore nobody can control us without our consent. And this, of course, became a very important idea for Thomas Jefferson, who put this phrase, consent of the governed, into the Declaration of Independence of the United States, and for the other founding fathers of the United States. Another thing that Locke really hammers away at is the role of the mother. And he was very much ahead of his time on this, but Locke emphasizes that the mother has equal parental rights with the father. And Jaleesa, you pointed this out very nicely. In other words, Locke uses the rights of mothers in the family to undermine the idea that absolute kingly power had been passed down from father to son since the time of Adam, the first man. And so with both the father and mother having rights, the family becomes a little bit more of a community and less about absolute paternal authority. Question 2, Quinetta Blakely posted the group's answer that what makes a government legitimate, every individual must consent to forming a community, and then decisions are determined by majority rule. So once the people get together and consent to take part in a society, a government, then the majority of the people has the right to rule. And third question, I asked, do people get to keep their natural rights once they agree to join a society? For Locke, human beings have 3 natural rights that come from God: the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property. Now, Jefferson would later change that third one to the right to pursuit of happiness, but the point is the same, that these rights come from God. And for Locke, even once we give our consent to join a society, nobody can take those rights away from us without our consent. And so this too became a very, very important principle for our society, that we have certain rights that are absolute and that the government can never take away from us unless by our own free will we renounce them. All right. Now, moving into their reading for the Age of Revolutions, you see a somewhat different approach being put forth in France. And as I mentioned in the lecture, the French approach to enlightened political thought was often quite different from the English approach. Group 1 had the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen that was put forth during the French Revolution in 1789. And nice summary of this document in the group's answer posted by Quinetta. The aim of all political association is the preservation of the natural and prescriptible rights of man. Their rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. The individual's natural rights have no limits, except those which assure to the other members of the society the enjoyment of the same rights. These limits can only be determined by law. Now, there's the catch. The Declaration of Rights of Man gives everyone a guarantee of their rights as long as the French National Assembly doesn't make any laws to the contrary, taking away those rights. And this was a major problem, in a sense, a difference from our system. Deborah, you pointed out, I feel that that the rights of citizens could be taken away at any time given the lax law-passing abilities of the National Assembly. And Leslie said, and when a government is determining the law and the nature of the offenses, this leaves interpretation of the severity of the offense up to the government. So, in a sense, the system that the French created gave their National Assembly tremendous power to override the rights that were contained in the Declaration of Rights of Man, and we'll see later some ways that they did that. Whereas in our system, we at least have the theory that the government can never take away our natural rights, that those are guaranteed by the Constitution, and that an act of Congress or of the President cannot take those rights away. All right, good job, Group 1. Moving on to Group 2, another French political theorist for the Enlightenment, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, actually Swiss, but he wrote in French. From his book, The Social Contract, in which he set forth his theory of how societies are formed, that all the people have to get together and, as Locke said, give their consent to become members of the society. But for Rousseau, there's a very important difference from Locke, summed up in Jasmine's answer to question 1. Jasmine Lopez was the chair this time. Rousseau believed that members of a society should give up their natural rights for the greater good of everyone. So, unlike Locke, who thought that governments really existed in order to protect people's natural rights, Rousseau thought that it was necessary for everyone to give up their natural rights as a condition of enjoying the benefits of society and government. And I asked Group 2 what they thought of that, if they found that potentially problematic. You had a very nice, thoughtful response here. You said, this system of government would be beneficial by letting the people as a whole dictate the way of life they live without anything being imposed on them, decreasing the chances of favoritism or unfair treatment towards a particular group, and also providing the feeling of empowerment. This system of government could also be harmful by lacking true leadership, which may be needed in certain situations, and not having a single fair individual to settle disputes between two sides without bias. This could work, depending on the culture and morals of the people in the land. So, according to Rousseau's theory, once people entered society and agreed to the social contract, the ruler of society was what he called the general will. That is, all the people, the will of all the people all together, making decisions all together. Which was one of those ideas that, in a sense, sounded great in theory, but it led to a lot of practical problems. For instance, who was going to carry out the day-to-day practical business of governing, as Will suggested? Without having an authority to look to single authority, this could cause problems. Another potential problem was, what do you do if some individuals in society refuse to follow a certain decision made by the general will? What happens to them? Well, Rousseau's response is very simple. He says those people have to be forced to be free. In other words, they have to be forced to go along with the decisions of the general will because it's in their own best interest to do so. And you see the potential problem here. How can someone be forced to be free? It seems like such a contradiction. And group two, pretty much your consensus was that it is a contradiction and it is unworkable. Nevertheless, Rousseau's ideas were also very influential on the American founding fathers and, of course, on the French revolutionaries. One of those revolutionaries was the Marquis de Condorcet, and Group 2's second reading was by Condorcet, and he's talking about his hopes for the future as a result of the French Revolution. Caitlin, you had a good post here. His three main hopes for the future are abolition of inequality between nations, progress of equality within each nation,